During the first lecture of this course, we discussed the philosophical premises required for efficient thinking. We said that only the man who accepts the absolutism of reason, the man who knows that reality is objective and is not dependent upon his consciousness, who knows that his consciousness is volitional and must function by his choice, and who recognizes that the world is fully knowable to the human mind, will use his mind to its top capacity and with maximum efficiency. This is not, of course, to say that no one can think efficiently who has not verbally and explicitly accepted these premises, but that whether they are held explicitly or only by implication, the efficacy and conscientiousness of one's mental processes depends in large measure upon them. A mystic or part mystic, believing that there is a form of knowledge other than reason, can have no means or incentive to expand and perfect the functioning of his rational faculty. A subjectivist or part subjectivist, believing that reality is not firm and absolute, will have no means or incentive to learn the methods of grasping a firm, absolute reality. A determinist or part determinist, believing that his life, his character, and his actions are not in his own control, will have no incentive or psychological power to attempt rationally to arrive at conclusions, since he believes that they are all preset for him, and that the action of his mind cannot affect his life. A man caught by the concept that reality, or some part of reality, is by its nature unknowable, will have no incentive to use his mind, since he believes that understanding is not possible anyway. The extent to which one holds any part of these premises is the extent to which one's intellectual efficacy is impaired and sabotaged. Tonight I want to discuss some of the fundamental psychological preconditions of efficient thinking. The psychological premises or attitudes without which a man will not use the maximum potential of his rational faculty, nor seek to improve and expand his power to grasp existence. To say that there are psychological preconditions of efficient thinking is not, however, to deny volition. Whatever one's psychological or philosophical premises, one can think. Nothing short of psychosis can make thinking literally impossible. The question we will consider tonight is what psychological premises put obstacles in the way of efficient thinking, make the process of thinking difficult, laborious, painful, tend to remove the incentives to thinking. And, on the other hand, what psychological premises make thinking a pleasant, relatively easier task, for which one sees and grasps all the incentives and value, and thereby tend to increase the efficacy of one's mental effort. In order to think efficiently, one must be convinced that one can think efficiently, that to grasp and understand and judge the world is in fact within one's own power, that one's mind has the power to attain knowledge, not just that man in the abstract can, but that you can. In other words, the first psychological precondition of efficient thinking is the possession of an unbreached self-esteem. Let me briefly remind you of what we mean by self-esteem. Self-esteem is a judgment of moral approval which a man passes upon himself. It is his moral sanction of his own person. It is his recognition of the fact that he is good in the most fundamental and essential sense of that term. To be good in this most basic sense means to be good for reality, to be able and competent to live, to be able to achieve one's values. A man of self-esteem is a man confident of his power to deal with existence and confident of his willingness to do so, which means confident of his power and determination to think, to face every issue, every problem, with the fullest, most rigorous force of his mind. Self-esteem is the result not of the amount of one's knowledge, but of one's determination to acquire knowledge, not of the extent to which one is creative or of the extent of one's intelligence, but of the best and most constant use of one's intellectual capacity, not of the number or extent of the solutions one arrives at, not of the consequences of any particular thought process, but of one's knowledge that one has initiated and sustained that thought process, not of one's success or failure in seeing any given solution, but of the knowledge that one has looked. Self-esteem is one's verdict of moral approval on oneself, and the self is the mind. Specific ideas, emotions, and actions are derivatives and consequences. They result from the action of the mind. But the single constant in man, and that which makes him able to live and able to achieve his values, is his mind. The mind is the first cause of everything else about his life, his actions, his ideas, his emotions, for good or for evil. Self-esteem, then, rests on the knowledge that, as a way of life and as a consistent approach to reality, one does that which is in one's power and which is the necessary precondition of the achievement of any value. That is, it rests on the knowledge that one thinks. I quote from an article by Mr. Branden on self-esteem, which appeared in The Objectivist. Self-esteem is confidence in one's mind, in its reliability as a tool of cognition. Such confidence is not the conviction that one can never make an error. It is the conviction that one is competent to think, to judge, to know, and to correct one's errors, that one is competent in principle, that one is unreservedly committed to being in unbreached contact with reality, to the fullest extent of one's volitional power. It is the confidence of knowing that one places no value or consideration higher than reality, no devotion or concern higher than one's respect for facts." Unquote. Thinking, then, is the precondition of self-esteem. No man who evades, no man who shirks the responsibility of thinking and pronouncing judgment can maintain an unbreached self-esteem. He cannot have confidence in his mind if he does not use it. He cannot convince himself that he can and will think if he does not do so. If his method of facing reality is to evade, blank out, go out of focus, be ruled by his emotions, blindly accept the opinions of others, or reject the responsibility of forming any convictions. If you do not think, if that is not your characteristic means of facing issues and problems, if you are an evader, such that when a problem is difficult or a thought painful, you push it out of your mind, not to be considered or identified. If you walk around in a state of semi-consciousness, rarely fully in focus, rarely fully in touch with reality. If, when you do turn on your mind, you are too often sloppy, lazy, or careless, reaching for the nearest and handiest solution to a problem rather than the correct one, if your emotions receive priority over the judgments of your mind, and when you experience a desire, you either evade any knowledge